I have a second channel, Cube Comp MTDX. Hey everybody. So the rebuilt Dell system is back. If you haven't watched the first video, I'll put a link in the description for the video. So essentially what happened last time was got a computer in for service. Was going to do a simple CPU swap on it. Well, the motherboard that's in it is one of those HP motherboards that's powered by a laptop adapter, and it could not accept anything over a 35 watt TDP processor. It had a Celeron chip in it, and I wanted to swap in a Sandy Bridge Pentium. Well, it didn't like it because the Sandy Bridge Pentium was a 65 watt. So went on eBay, ordered a motherboard. Motherboard mentioned in the list. I mean, the seller mentioned in the listing. Tested good. Got it. And I failed to realize that there was a damage spot on the side of the board. So I proceeded to go ahead and tear down the previous computer to get parts out of it to transfer over to this system, to this tower. Got it all slapped together and realized the board was DOA. Well, so I ended up popping this board in just for the time being. The thing is, I wasn't really clear in the end of my last video. It was really late when I shot that video. Really, the reason why I slapped this in here is that some of you guys might be asking, like, why didn't you just go ahead and just put the old machine back together? Well, I mean, I could have, but I was already so far into this one that I already had swapped over the drives and whatnot, and it was just to the point where it's like, okay, let me see what I have on hand just to pass a little bit of time. And I had this set up here, which was, I'd say, as well as CPU performance, it was better, but everything else, including the graphics, was not that great. I was very clear with the client that it was temporary and that I would be working with the eBay seller to get a replacement motherboard. And I do have a replacement motherboard now. It's actually from a different seller. Seller A was very accommodating. They wanted to have the board shipped back so that way they could have it recycled, and they paid for shipping. I didn't have to pay to return it, so it was I got a full refund for it. So I'm happy there. So yeah, as mentioned, CPU performance versus that Celeron, it did seem a little bit more snappy there, but the RAM in it was a little bit less, and also older memory, DDR2 versus DDR3, and the onboard graphics of this board just could not compare to the graphics that was on the other board. So I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't exactly what I had intended for it to be, but it was not in any means permanent. It was just a temporary way to get this thing back up and going. Just to pass about a week of time. So yeah, just a week is all it took for me to get the other board sent back, and I went ahead and ordered a replacement, and the replacement motherboard is here. So there's a replacement motherboard, and I will be testing this motherboard before I even go to break down this system. This is another socket 1155 motherboard. This one is a little bit newer. It's actually from the Windows 8 era, as we have a Windows 8 sticker on the back here, which means this board also has a Windows 8 product key in the BIOS, more than likely. So we should be able to transfer over the Windows 10 license just fine with this one. Amazingly enough, Windows 10 on this hard drive transferred over to this and activated just fine. I was really shocked in a way. But anyways, this is the replacement motherboard. It was pulled out of a Dell Vostro, no, excuse me, an Inspiron 660. So socket 1155. Now, one thing I'm not real crazy about is Dell did not install a heatsink on this chip, and I'm going to actually install one. I do have a heatsink available sitting around here somewhere. I just got to do a little bit of modification to it to make the holes line up. But what I'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and install the Pentium Sandy Bridge chip, as well as the 6 gigabytes of RAM that came from the previous computer. Get that on here, and I'm going to bench test this motherboard to make sure it works before I even go to swap out this one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and grab the memory and install it. So this is the previous computer, that HP system. It was definitely worked on by a shop at one point. I think I had the hard drive replaced in it. Maybe the previous hard drive had failed. I don't know if this was the original RAM to that machine, because it was just kind of a weird combination, having a lower end, just having a Celeron chip, but 6 gigabytes of RAM. Usually budget computers have like 2 or 4 gigabytes. Now we're talking about a Windows 7 computer from, I want to say, 2011. Yeah. The hard drive that I pulled out of that machine had a manufacture date of year 2015. So the hard drive, I'd say, has been replaced in that machine. So let's figure out what I did with the processor. Okay, it's sitting over here. I tell you, it's funny. Once we get done with this is going to practically be a newer Dell computer and an older Dell chassis. It's going to be funny to see the splash screen on the computer when you start it to show Dell and everything, including the Windows 10 startup. If I do convert it to GPT, that's something else I'm going to try to do. I'm going to lock this back down. Yeah, another I'd say decent seller. I forget the seller I ordered this one from. Actually, no, hang on, it's on the label over here. PC Parts Outlet Store. And here's the interesting thing. You know, guys, with the coronavirus situation going on, this this motherboard came straight from Kent, Washington. And at least as of the time this motherboard shipped, I think Washington State was probably the second, the second place state for the most confirmed coronavirus infections, or COVID-19 infections. So, needless to say, when the package showed up about my doorstep, yeah, once I unboxed it, I vigorously washed my hands. I tell you, you know, I see some people are downplaying this thing like it's no big deal, but it is a very big deal. People need to pay attention and use caution and be careful. Okay, so now I just need to get a paper towel and just clean off this processor and the cooler before I put thermal compound here and attach the heatsink fan. Yeah, it's a good thing I already happen to have plenty of rubbing alcohol on hand, because buying at the store right now is not quite so easy, given that everybody's buying it up. And I did manage to find, I went to Walmart, what was it, yesterday, and that actually managed to find hand soap. I was actually kind of surprised. So I'm going to go ahead and detach this back plate. This motherboard came with a back plate, and I'm going to see if it's actually compatible. It might be. We'll just have to see for sure here in a moment. I think I mentioned it in the previous video, I'm not really a fan of how Intel has handled sockets over the past decade. And of course, when we went from the LGA 775, and then we had the 1366 and the 1155 and 1156, those. And we went from 775 to the 1366 with the new Intel Core processors. Of course, they just had to change up the mounting dimensions of these holes, so that way you couldn't use your existing Intel 775 coolers. Now I must say, the Intel 775 coolers from the Pentium D era, those things are massive. I have a bunch of them, but sadly I cannot use them on newer Intel setups because of the misalignment of the holes. Whereas with AMD, if I wanted to, on a socket AM4 Ryzen, if I had an existing heatsink that I had on a socket 754 motherboard from years back, a nice massive heatsink, I could use that one because the clips are in the same spot. Now, AMD did actually change mounting holes up after, well, they did change holes from, they did change holes between socket 939 and AM2, and then after, see, it was an AM3 Plus they changed to, or AM3, one of those, they changed the holes a little bit when they went to the socket, I think it's FM1 or FM2, and I think that's what they're currently using on Ryzen. Now, I'm not referring to Threadripper. But let's see if I even mount any paste on here, and we'll see if this bracket will work. Just kind of make sure there's make sure it's. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Let me try screwing it down and see if it actually will mate up with the CPU. It might, sure enough. Let's see. That way I don't have to go through the trouble of having to change out the backplate. Now, of course, I will need to pull this back off and apply some thermal compound before I go start this. Make sure these are all tight. And they're tight now. Oh yes, that should work fine. I don't see any gap. It looks like it's flat up against the processor. Very good, so I don't have to go through I don't have to change out this bracket. Even though this one, the plastic part, is actually held on by adhesive to this metal plate. This one, however, you have to change out everything. So that's nice. Okay, so we'll pull this back off. And we'll apply some paste. And I'm sure somebody will leave a comment on it's like, why are you spreading your paste? Why don't you put a big blob in the center? I will say this, usually spreading it works fine for me. I've tried it both ways on my own system and saw little to no difference in temperatures. Now, there have been a couple of rare occasions to where if I did do a spread, it didn't actually get good. It didn't actually set well. This happened with a couple of Intel based heatsinks, not this one here, but some I'd have to put a blob in the center. But that was a very rare occasion. So, got some thermal compound here. I'm actually getting low. Since I have several Best Buy gift cards, I might have to make a run to Best Buy. Not sure if I'm going to do it anytime soon, though. given the county I live in the state of North Carolina has the highest number of confirmed cases of COVID-19. Okay, so now I'm going to reattach this cooler. Okay, so I did mention that this motherboard is actually out of a Dell system. It pulls a pull from a Dell Inspiron 660, and that happens to be one of the few Dell machines from at least the modern era that seems to use a non-proprietary design. It uses a standard micro ATX board, and every header I see on this board is standardized. It's like the USB, the audio, the front panel, all that stuff is standardized. It's not Dell's own little special design, I should say. And even the chassis that this motherboard sits in is at least would sit in. If it's anything, if it's like the Vostro 430 I have, it's standard. Now this Dimension 2400 chassis, the only thing non-standard about it is its audio jack, and I guess if I had to, I could figure out how to rewire that, but the client doesn't use the front audio jack anyway. She only uses the USB ports. So there you have it. And of course, this whole thing's spring-loaded. Okay, so now I'm going to grab a power supply, and we'll get this. We'll go and test this thing out. Okay, so I got the power supply plugged up, and also have a little power switch hooked up. Yeah, I figure may as well. That way, just in case the BIOS wants to complain about a system fan not being plugged in, I was going to plug in a fan, and I'll sit it off to the side. Try to anyway. Okay, let's go and test it. And we have life. Hard disk drive failure. Probably because there's no hard drive plugged up. Okay, we're going to hit this. We're going to run setup. Yep, as I suspected, this was one of those Dell boards that uses. It's one of those unusual Dells. It doesn't use a typical Dell BIOS. It's built like a standard micro ATX tower, but it does see our Pentium G640 Sandy Bridge chip. Now, I like how it even tells you all the cache information right here in the BIOS too. That's pretty cool. It tells you the installed RAM, which is seeing all of our memory, all 6 gigs of it. Just look in the BIOS. Let me lock this tripod. There we are. Okay, we are in AHCI on the SATA. Okay. No, I don't want to quit. I'm going to turn off Secure Boot because our current Windows 10 installation on that hard drive is actually an MBR. So I'm going to change this briefly to Legacy. It's nice you can turn off keyboard error reporting if you wish. I keep hitting escape too many times. Okay. Okay, so simply put, the thing works. What better could you ask for? So now we know we're in the clear to install this thing into the system. It works fine. So, you know what's next? It's time to install this motherboard into the system. Okay, before I mount this board, I almost had forgotten. I do need to mount this. I'm gonna mount this heatsink onto the Southbridge chip. I assume that's a Southbridge. I'm not really not the most familiar with this platform, but it's really weird how Dell did not install a heatsink on this motherboard, as I do remember the motherboard I got from that other seller out of an Acer. It had a heatsink on its chip, and the motherboard that was in the old computer for this client had a heatsink on that chip. So, I mean, it's like, okay, it's gonna probably work fine without a heatsink. I mean, obviously it probably has over time, but it's like, why? Why does it really make sense to skimp out on a little bitty heatsink that will probably cost the manufacturer maybe 10 cents a piece if you're rolling out many of these things? So what I'm gonna do is I gotta take this one push pin out, and what I gotta do is I'm gonna off camera have a look at the alignment. Okay, so I need to drill inward. I gotta open up this hole inward toward the heatsink a little bit, and I might have to do it on both sides. We'll see in a moment. I'm gonna take my drill and find a bit that is as close to that size as possible. I don't think any of these are going to work, but let's see. Actually, that is really close. I'll use this one here. And obviously I got this a good ways away from the motherboard, so that way I don't get metal shavings on the board. I don't need that. Okay, carefully do this. Okay. Let's go ahead and make sure that the push pin will still work like it's supposed to. Make sure the spring don't go popping right through it. Oh yeah, that's fine. I might still need to go a bit further in, but we'll see. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the other side. That way it's even on both sides, or as close to as even as possible. So just do exactly the same as before. Okay, not sure if that's going to be good enough or not, but we'll find out here in a moment. Okay, so I went ahead and removed the metal shavings off of this heatsink. And wash my hands to get the metal shavings off of my hands, and we'll see how this lines up with the holes now. So anytime you mod a heatsink like this, it's very important you take extra precautions and make sure you get all the metal shavings off of it before you even test fit it to your board. And I'd say it's pretty close. Now the heatsink itself is going to sit a little crooked, which is okay. I think I do need to actually drill the holes a bit further, so we'll continue on with it. And once we're all done, we'll have to clean the table off too. So I can do that with just a wet paper towel. That'll get the metal shavings off the table. So, all right, so we're going to try this some more. So I guess one thing I should mention again, well I haven't mentioned it yet. Don't be like me. Wear safety goggles and gloves when handling drills. But you know, I typically don't. But don't be like me. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and see how this looks on the motherboard. Now with these little push pins, you do have a little bit of, I guess I can say, give and take on how they will fit. Let's see if I can do a test clamp in here. Make sure make sure these things still work as intended. See if we can clamp it in with it like this. Okay, so I'm going to have to come over further. I do think. No, wait. Actually, I think that'll do it. I think it's just close enough. So as I mentioned, the heatsink itself is going to look crooked. That's fine. But as long as it makes a flat seating with the chips die, we should be fine. And it does. Okay, so I'll go ahead and take out this heatsink. All I gotta do is just squeeze these little clips and it pops right out. Okay, so very good. Make sure I keep the motherboard over here on this side of the table until I clean that up. And a paper towel that has not been used with the heatsink. Let's put a little bit of rubbing alcohol on it to clean up the chip surface as well as the heatsink surface. And one thing I have to do is once I get this heatsink installed and get this motherboard installed in the system, I'll have to test fill this heatsink, see how warm it is. And if it's hot to the touch, let's make you think how hot the chip was without any aid of cooling. Yeah. The reason why I'm doing this is to help improve this motherboard's longevity. Because I think that's kind of ridiculous to not have a heatsink on your chip when your chip was clearly designed to have a heatsink on it. And even when the motherboard has the provisions for a heatsink to be installed. I think that's Dell kind of skipping a little bit, saving a little bit of money by not installing heatsinks, and perhaps increasing the rate of failure of this chip due to overheating, potential overheating. Now with these little direct contact chips, I always spread the compound and to try to help ensure that the entire surface of the chip is coated fairly well. You don't need much, just a little bit is all you need. Okay. So let's go ahead and clamp this on here and we'll go and get this motherboard installed. Perfect. Okay, now let's go ahead and clean up the table. Let's move everything back. This was my work area right here, so what I'll do is I'll take my trash can right here, set it right next to the spot. We'll dampen this paper towel. Leave it pretty wet. And we're just going to wipe in one motion. And actually fold the paper towel a couple of times. This should help ensure that all the metal gets picked up. And we'll get some fresh paper towels and wipe that down. Okay, we're all set. Okay, everybody, I just got done, or recently got done, backing up the files off the hard drive. I did not only a full clone backup, where I more or less created a virtual drive and used a partitioning utility to do a disk copy. I also did just a separate file backup of the client's user profile. So now we'll go ahead and pull out this motherboard and swap it out for the replacement Dell board. So as I mentioned, it's going to be funny having a newer Dell motherboard inside this older Dell chassis. So let's go ahead and start disconnecting stuff. This should be a pretty quick swap out, I think, since I've already taken care of the other stuff like the installing the RAM and the CPU and the other board. These clips just don't want to cooperate. That thing was in there. Let's go and disconnect all the USB, the front panel headers, the SATA cables, all that good stuff. There's not too much to disconnect on this one. And we can go ahead and pull the board out. Okay, knock out this shield. And swap in the replacement one. That went in very easy compared to a lot of the ones I've had to deal with. Okay, let's go ahead and drop in the replacement board. This motherboard is actually smaller. Okay, so I'll go ahead and bolt everything back in. Okay, so we don't need as many screws to secure this one in because it's not quite as long from rear to front. And it looks like we may have a cable reach issue already. This USB header is just not quite long enough. Okay, so I managed to make it work. What I did is I actually unbolted the hard drive cage and moved it into the second slot. Now, typically on these Dells, I think you're supposed to have one hard drive here, and then you can put a second cage in and latch into the first one. But I mean, there's a screw here that holds it, and a screw back here that holds it, and I think it's going to be okay. But it would have been nice if Dell would have supplied, or at least Dell OEM, this chassis would have supplied another about 2 inches of USB cable header. That would have been very nice. But it does reach. It's just when it comes out of the circuit board back there, it makes an immediate right and goes around this hard drive. So pulling the hard drive out a little ways, about an inch or so, did make some difference there, and it did allow this to plug up. So we're just gonna go with it like that. Like I say, it should be fine. And continue plugging stuff in. Also going to bolt in the fan I had previously installed in here. I had to remove it because this motherboard back here, the AMD baseboard, did not have a system fan header in the appropriate spot. Kind of weird design. They had both system fan headers on the lower right corner of the motherboard. That's kind of ridiculous in a way. But this one does provide a 3-pin system fan header right there. So we can go and restore this fan the way I had it previously. Plug that in down here. Okay, that's it. The motherboard is installed. So now we can test this thing and see how it works. Like I say, that hard drive cage has just a little bit of play in it, but again, I don't see it being really much of any issue. And I had a discussion with the client about the potential need to have to reinstall their operating system, and I told them I recommend actually I'm doing that because their existing machine took a free Windows 10 upgrade from Windows 7, and the existing Windows 7 installation just has some bloat, and Of course, a reinstall would take care of that. And this machine here has a UEFI firmware on it versus a classic BIOS that the old motherboard had. At least I think anyway. It was a Windows 7 system that booted using MBR, whereas Windows 8 and Windows 10 tend to favor GPT or UEFI. So let's go ahead and plug everything in. And considering we tested the board before installing it and we confirmed it works, we shouldn't have an issue. Keyword shouldn't. Yeah, this motherboard here is definitely newer than the previous board that was in that other HP system. Okay, first I'm going to briefly disconnect the SATA drive, at least the hard drive. Just want to do a quick power on test. And there you have it. So pretty appropriate to have a Dell splash screen on a system that says Dell on it. But yeah, so I think we're good to go. Anyways, I'm gonna plug that hard drive back in and I'll see what this thing does. Okay, so it does appear to be starting up. Wait. Okay, it's installing devices, so it looks like it might be a successful boot up. But I did want to take a moment to focus on that little heatsink there, remember? The little heatsink I installed on this board where it didn't have a heatsink. When I feel this heatsink, it's pretty toasty hot to the touch. So just to think, I mean that is a small heatsink, so it doesn't offer a lot of cooling capacity, but you just imagine how hot that little chip was getting without any heatsink at all. So something is better than nothing. So here we have it. This thing's starting right up, and hopefully things will go well. Okay, so I'm going to actually go ahead and proceed with reinstalling Windows. So I got to update the time. And we'll go ahead and set this thing to boot in UEFI. I'm going to leave secure boot off. So as I think I mentioned, I have not only a I did a drive clone of the existing hard drive, so that way I have a fail-safe to go back to if the client decides, no, I want my Windows back. So I do have that, and I also have a separate file backup. That way I can just easily restore the files from a user profile without having to mess with the without having to connect the virtual drive and have to set file permissions to access our files on that drive and all that mess. So that's taken care of, so we're all clear to go ahead and reload Windows on this thing. That's ultimately going to help improve their performance, because I mean we can put i7 in this thing, but with the condition that Windows is in right now, it's not going to make a big difference. So anyways, that's taken care of. So all we need to do is just go and restart the machine. Boot into Windows 10 64-bit. Weird. I wonder why it's not picking up the product key on this thing. Interesting, because it should have a product key. Theoretically, it should have a product key in the motherboard. I'll have to look into that later. I was going to say I don't have a product key. Yeah, usually it would auto detect in that case, but I'm going to select Windows 10 Home. Here's our drive. See how it partitions it. Yep, as a GPT. And we'll let this install. Okay, so I just finished the installation, and funny to note, it picked up a digital license apparently off the internet. Perhaps from the previous machine this motherboard was installed inside of. There was probably a digital license out there on the on Microsoft server somewhere, so it activated just fine. I tell you, the funny thing about Windows 10 activation is something else. But so I just got Windows installed, and now it's, as you can see, it's installing drivers. It's doing the display driver right now. So what this means now is I'm going to go ahead and finish setting this thing up, and I think I'm going to go into the video right here. So after an epic fail the first time around, the second time around it looks like we are good to go with this upgrade. So this completes the Dell chassis rebuild, and it's funny to note we have, simply put, a newer Dell motherboard inside of an older Dell chassis. Pretty cool, huh? So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Well, everybody, that's it for this video, but don't forget there's a lot more interesting stuff on the channel to check out. Also, if this is your first time visiting this channel, feel free to subscribe to keep your channel, and also don't forget to tick the bell so that way you'll get notified of new video posts. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, but if you really didn't like it, there is the alternative option available as well. Also, feel free to check out my second channel, CubeComp MTDX. There you'll find videos about bicycling, weather, elevator tours, and all sorts of other neat, interesting stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to come back, and thank you for your support.